Hello and welcome to this video. On this video, I'm going to be going through my 10 favorite albums on the record label ECM. ECM has been a very, very important influence on jazz, I would say for the good, for the last 60 years or so. Well, actually they were formed in, when was ECM Records formed? I think it was formed in 1970 by Manfred Eicher. So it's been around for 55 years. Manfred Eicher wanted to create a label that we record European, free jazz, improvised music, straight jazz, even bits of jazz rock and jazz fusion. He wanted to record it at very high quality using almost like classical recording studio techniques. So he really treated the jazz units as chamber orchestras. They pioneered a whole bunch of stuff. One of the things was to really let the artist be creative and not to worry about commerciality. So there was no pushing towards writing songs, you know, or making sort of disco records. None of that happened, which was a very important thing throughout jazz fusion, especially. I would say the ECM through the late 70s and the 80s, any jazz rock or fusion released on their label would have still been at high quality, all of it. So that would have been guaranteed. And that was a very difficult thing to find at that time. They also pioneered putting groups together, especially to make albums, often duos. And also they pioneered solo album performances. The album, The Holland Concert by Jarrett that was made in 1975, went on to sell 6 million records. It's the biggest selling solo jazz piano album in history. And that really enabled Manfred Eicher to take the profits from that and plow it back into the company. So I only have good things to say about ECM. They also have a very individualistic, artistic vision for the artwork on their albums. So it's, you could say the standard sort of ECM album would be some sort of semi-abstracted photograph with just very simple typeface on the cover, but they do far more than that. But there is definitely a certain look with the ECM album artwork, and you can buy books of just the artwork because it's so wonderful. So, you know, you can see I'm a massive fan of ECM. In my choice here, I basically pulled out my 10 favorites. It's been really difficult because there's like probably 100 albums that I absolutely love on this label, like albums that I have really, you know, have been there all my life, really important albums. So I've been pulling ones out and I have to pull them back and push them back and all this bit. I have heard towards jazz rock, but it's not all jazz rock. I was originally going to do my 10 favorite jazz rock albums on ECM, but I thought I'll just pull out my favorite ones and see how many of them could be classified as jazz rock, and it's quite a few. So shall we get straight in to the ranking? Right, so we're going to start at number 10. This is a wonderful album by a guitarist that always sort of gets left out of the discussion of jazz rock fusion guitarists, and that's the guitarist Terje Rypdal. Terje Rypdal is a Norwegian guitarist that signed up to ECM in the early days. And if you haven't heard Terje Rypdal, imagine an Icelandic Jimi Hendrix creating these sort of sonic soundscapes that are somewhere between the Bill Evans group and Tangerine Dream. That's the best I can do. There's a whole host of incredible albums by Terje Rypdal, you know, and some absolutely classic ones. But actually my favorite, and I think this is his best album on the label, and the people will disagree, but this is my favorite, is this one, right? If Mountains Could Sing, which came out in, I think, the 90s. What year was this? 1995. So we're talking 30 years ago now. And there's your typical ECM album cover, sort of abstracted, natural landscape, black and white, and then very simple typeface. The thing I love about this album is he's basically got a power trio on him. It's him, Terje Rypdal on guitars, Bjorn Klemmier on bass, and Auden Kliev on drums. And then we also have a string quartet. And so this album goes from the sort of standard Terje Rypdal area of playing with the band, but it does get really fiery. There's a track called One for the Roadrunner, which absolutely burns. It's fierce jazz rock, that track is. We also get beautiful tunes with the string quartets. They augment the music brilliantly. And also on this album, you get tunes. There's stuff that is very, very accessible. If you like Pat Metheny, there's a couple of tracks on here that have that sort of melodic, you know, sort of attraction about them. This is an absolutely fantastic album. It's a great starting place for Terje Rypdal. A lot of the 70s albums can be quite abstract, quite jazz, quite improvised. I love them, absolutely love them, especially the trios that he did with Jack DeJohnette and Miroslav Vitous. That's incredible stuff. There's so many incredible classic albums. If you want to check out Terje Rypdal or any ECM artist that's been prolific, check out the Works albums. I don't want to say this for every single artist, but check out the Works albums. The Terje Rypdal is absolutely fantastic. I will talk about the Works albums at the end of this video. So let's now move on to number 9. This album is a jazz rock fusion album from the 1980s. It's one of the great jazz rock fusion albums from the 1980s, and it's a must for progressive rock fans because it features Bill Bruford and Tony Levin. We have one half of King Crimson here, and if you love the sort of 80s King Crimson, this is an essential album. It's actually under the name of David Torn, but it really is a group affair. David Torn is an incredible guitarist, the sort of soundscaping, like it's a guy that really changes the sound of electric guitar, a little bit like Adrian Belew, but a lot more icy, and he can be very fiery as well, David Torn. On here, he joins up with Tony Levin and Bill Bruford, and we get the great Mark Isham on trumpet. Mark Isham's done some great records. I've got a couple from the 90s that are very good. And he did a tribute to Miles Davis in a silent way, which is great. So this is a little bit closer to a sort of more standard jazz group with the trumpet. But Tony Levin, Bill Bruford, and David Torn are all pushing the sound of their instruments. Bill Bruford especially is interesting on this album. It's one of Bruford's greatest albums. He's playing Simmons electric kit on here, and rather than them have drum sounds on, he has chords. He has chords and notes. And so his drum parts are filling out the actual melodic and harmonic aspects of the music. This is very rare that you would hear this. It's one of the few albums where this is done, where the drummer's actually providing that sort of melodic element. This is probably the most extreme example I can think of, without a drummer just triggering tunes, you know, which is a different thing. Dave Torn is incredibly soundscapey on guitar. Tony Levin is playing Chapman stick and synthesizer bass. So there's no electric bass on here. This really pushes the envelope in terms of what a band sounds like. Absolutely incredible album. Very improvised, recorded in 1986, probably recorded in a couple of days. This is one of the things that Manfred does to keep the costs down, is that there's a very strict recording process. My friend Dominic Miller, who's the guitarist with Sting, he makes albums on ECM Records, and a few months ago he actually was messaging me whilst making an album for Manfred, which was incredible. And it was basically first day set up, get all set up, recording, mics up, and then I think they had 2 days of just playing. If they made mistakes, they made mistakes, and then at the end, on the last day, it was mixed and the album was done in 4 days. Absolutely incredible. For some artists, that has been a little bit of something that pulls them in, you know. So that would be the only criticism I've got of ECM, would be you're never going to get an epic, okay? You might get like the 9-disc Sun Bear concerts by Keith Jarrett, which is pretty epic, but you're never going to get anyone spending 2 months in the studio making an album. But that's a minor niggle, isn't it? A minor niggle. Right, let's move on to number 8. Okay, so We've had, and this is quite a surprise for you, and I've deliberately done this, we've had a surprise appearance of Bill Bruford and Tony Levitt. Here's another surprise for you, Jan Hammer. Now, Jan Hammer has made a couple of albums on ECM, the first being the classic Timeless under John Abercrombie's name, which was an organ trio, Jan on organ, Jack DeJohnette on drums, and John Abercrombie on guitar. This is one of the most important jazz rock albums from the 1970s. The reason why I didn't pull it out is because I actually don't own a copy at the moment. I did many years ago, and I can't find it, so I assume it's got lost at some point. But that was never my favourite of that group. They actually made another album, and it's this one, Night. John Abercrombie, and this features, as you can see, Jan Hammer, Jack DeJohnette, and it's also augmented by the great Michael Brecker, another player that you wouldn't necessarily associate with ECM, although he has appeared quite regularly on various albums. This is a fusion album. It's actually got reggae tracks on here, but it's also got very out, you know, almost like free time, no changeage playing. And of course, this lineup is absolutely incredible. You know, some of John Abercrombie's, I think this is my favourite album in terms of John Abercrombie's playing. Jan Hammer is great. It was recorded in 1984, just before Jan Hammer became a multi-millionaire doing the music to Miami Vice. There's a sort of Miami Vice undertone to this album, which is quite a rare type of sound for ECM, but it's been channeled through the sort of ECM sort of view of music. It's very interesting. The opening track, Ether Reggae, which is was written by Jan Hammer and is a reggae track, is very, very accessible. A lot of stuff on ECM records is less accessible. It's quite daunting to be taking on some, you know, drum improvisation album by Ed Blackwell and Nana Vasconcelos, you know, and I love all that stuff. But here, if you're a fusion fan, I mean, basically a viewer of this channel, and you like the music I like, that's an essential album. Jan Hammer with John Abercrombie, Jack DeJohnette, Michael Brecker, Night. You can see I think of it as a Jan Hammer album, right? So, what was number 8, wasn't it? Went to number 7 then. Another fusion album. And another one from the 80s. I've really pulled out some of the great fusion albums from the 80s. And again, a surprise appearance from the jazz rock fusion great John Scofield. And this is the Mark Johnson album, Bass Desires. This is an absolutely fantastic album. The lineup on here is Mark Johnson on bass, Bill Frisell on guitar and guitar synthesizer, John Scofield on guitar, and Peter Erskine on drums. I like Frisell. I like Bill Frisell. But I like Bill Frisell in the early days, when he was playing guitar synth and playing in a much more abstracted way. At some point, he discovered Americana and he went down that route. I still love that stuff very much. It's great stuff. He's a great player. Here, he is full on guitar synth territory. Scofield's been Scofield. They work very well together. They've done other stuff together as well. But the pairing of those two great guitarists, this is an epic pairing, to be honest. Mark Johnson's a fantastic bass player. He was the last bass player to play with the great Bill Evans. So he's in that lineage of Scott LaFaro, Eddie Gomez, you know, these incredible bass players that went through that trio. And of course, Peter Erskine from Weather Report, one of the great drummers. This is incredible. Samurai Hee-Haw, which is like a fusion track that opens up, really funky, driving, and the sound is incredible. They've given Peter Erskine this very sort of open jazz sound. He's got a small bass drum tuned quite high up. It's not what you'd associate with jazz rock. And so it's great to hear that. That's followed up by an incredible version of Resolution by John Coltrane off of Love Supreme. And then they do the traditional folk song, Black is the Colour of My True Love's Hair, which is so sparse and ambient. Side 2, we got Bass Desires, A Wishing Doll, which is a jazz standard, Mojo Highway, some more fusion, written by Mark Johnson. And then Scofield's take on Americana with Thanks Again, recorded in 1985. This is an absolute classic record, one of my favourite. And again, a different sound for jazz rock fusion. You know, this is very welcome. It was very welcome in the 80s to pick that album up. What have I got at number, whatever it is, 6, is it? I can't remember. We've done 4, so it's 6, isn't it? You could do simple maths, Andy, so, you know, show off your skills. Right, you all know why I'm here. I'm here because of John McLaughlin. He is my favourite musician, really, of all time. I have everything by him. He has made one album on ECM, although he was a sideman. But many people see this in the John McLaughlin catalogue. And for many people, and I've met them and they've said this to me, this is their favourite John McLaughlin album. Not my favourite, which is why it's lower down on the list, but it's nothing about the quality of this. It's just these coming up after and almost like classic, you know, jazz or jazz rock albums. The album is, of course, Making Music that he made with his partner in crime, Zakir Hussain. This was very exciting in the 1980s because John had sort of disappeared from view around about 1987. And then he would pop his head up with an album called Live at Royal Festival Hall that was recorded live. I was at that concert. So when this came out, this was quite exciting because we hadn't had a John McLaughlin album really since Adventures in Radioland. And that was a bit of a sort of patchy affair. Here, he was almost channeling Shakti, because you've got Zakir Hussain, John McLaughlin, and then the legendary Hari Prasad Chaudhary on flute. One of the most incredible sounds in music is Hari Prasad. I saw him live when he joined Shakti in 1997. I was at the recording of that Remembering Shakti album up in Birmingham at the Symphony Hall. And I can remember when Hari Prasad opened up and he picked this flute and he played it. The sound in the room and through this PA, it just sounded like the wind and an orchestra inside that sound. So this is absolutely wonderful. And he is augmented by the great Jan Garbarek, another one of the most individualistic sounds in jazz. Jan Garbarek plays alto sax, but he turns it into something that is somewhere between something from medieval classical music and maybe North African music. And he has turned that sound recently to playing certain early classical music. Can't remember exactly what. And those albums have sold millions, you know. So Jan Garbarek, who started off in the free jazz scene in the early 70s, has etched an incredible career, and one that I haven't really discussed on this channel that much. So this is a brilliant album. On here, we get Making Music, which is a tune by Zakir Hussain. We get Zakir, which is a John McLaughlin composition. We get You and Me, which is an improvisation between Hussain and John McLaughlin. The rest are all Zakir Hussain compositions. It's absolutely wonderful. Look at that sort of standard ECM cover. You've got Zakir on the back, you know, with his tablas and then leaving his tablas on their own. If we open it up, we get a load of photographs from the sessions. Ah, wonderful. And look, can you see the band there? What a band. A one-off band. A lot of people find John McLaughlin very, how can we describe it? Feverish, fast, you know, he doesn't swing, it's much more brutal, very virtuistic, and a lot of jazz fans find that difficult. On here, he isn't like that. He's playing acoustic, classical nylon string guitar, very melodic. At this point, he was extremely melodic anyway, and I feel that this point in the late 80s, early 90s, his guitar playing was at its peak. When he was playing nylon string classical guitar, in terms of the actual guitar playing, absolutely incredible, but very rhapsodic, very romantic as well. And this album is a must. If you don't like John McLaughlin, but you want to have one album just to represent that, get Making Music. Absolute classic. We're up to number 5. That's it, we're up to number 5. Right, an absolute classic album here. One of my favourite artists made a lot of records on ECM, and that artist is Chick Corea. when he made albums on ECM, you could always guarantee that they would be more artistic, more creative, and sometimes more out there. Now, one of my favorite albums by Chick Corea, and I've actually, it's over here, I'll pull it out, is this one, and I'm going to give it, and this so nearly got on the list. The only reason this didn't get on the list is because I've talked about it on the last few videos over and over again. This is an incredible album. So this album is also sneaking in here. Trio music by Chick Corea with Miroslav Vitos and Roy Haynes. And this album's a double album. One disc is a tribute to Thelonious Monk. They played a ton of Thelonious Monk tunes. And the other one is a bunch of duo and trio improvisations. It's absolutely incredible. One of my favourite Chick Corea. That might be my favourite Chick Corea album. So you would say, well, what can be better than that if that's your favourite Chick Corea album? Well, this one it's got two of the greatest artists in jazz and jazz rock fusion, Chick Corea and Gary Burton, with this album, Crystal Silence. And the thing that elevates this is the compositions. Gary Burton, it can be seen as one of the fathers of jazz rock. He was one of the first people to seriously meld jazz rock, meld jazz with rock. Right back in the late 60s, his style of jazz rock never really took hold until one of his sidemen, Pat Metheny, broke out in the 70s and started to sell, heavy records, a lot of records. And then his style, which was much more based upon melody and chord changes, not so much a modal style or a sort of theorish Mahavishnu style, has become almost now one of the de rigueur styles of jazz rock, especially quality, tasteful jazz rock. When Gary Burton met Chick Corea and they started jamming together, piano and vibraphone, there is such an empathy there. Now, some people will rate the late 70s live album that they did, and that's absolutely fantastic. And they probably take some of these compositions even further out on here. But for me, this is a classic album. This records the meeting for the first time. It was made pretty early on in 1973. And they do some incredible tunes. We've got Sing Your Mouse by Chick Corea, Desert Air by Chick Corea, Crystal Silence by Chick Corea, Children's Song by Chick Corea, and What Game Shall We Play Today by Chick Corea. Sing Your Mouse, of course, is a high-powered fusion tune that he played on Hymn to the Seventh Galaxy. What Game Shall We Play Today was from the Latin jazz fusion group that preceded the electric fusion group. And that is, I believe, that's on Light as a Feather. We also get some great compositions by other musicians. We get Arise, Arise by Steve Swallow. We get I'm Your Pal by Steve Swallow. And we get the absolutely classic Falling Grace, which is almost like a jazz standard from Steve Swallow. We also have Feelings and Things by Mike Gibbs. Interestingly, there's no compositions by Gary Burton on here. That's by the by. That's becoming my catchphrase now, by the by. That's when I'm talking and I get into a place and I don't know how to get out of it. I go, well, that's by the by, and then I move on. It's an absolutely wonderful album. We'll stick that down there onto number 4. There's a lot of free jazz, a lot of very improvised music on ECM, a lot of music that is quite heavy to listen to. I've tried to not choose those albums, but I do really love them. But I have pulled one out that is in that sort of area. And this is one of the greatest jazz albums ever made. This nearly made my top 30 jazz albums. The reason it didn't, because I just felt it was a little bit too fusion-y. It has a touch of the jazz rock fusion about it, this one. Maybe it should have made it. It's one of the greatest albums ever made. Right, it's Conference with the Birds by David Holland. David Holland is a British bass player. He's actually from Wolverhampton, which is half an hour up the road from me. I used to live in Wolverhampton. Perhaps along with Banks's Bitter, that isn't that the greatest export of Wolverhampton. Oh, they did make some keys, Chubb Keys as well. Chubb Keys, Wolverhampton Wanderers, Banks's Bitter, and the great David Holland. And that was ranked. David Holland is the greatest export from Wolverhampton. And a cohort of John McLaughlin in London in the late 60s. He got the invitation to go and play with Miles Davis and he was one of these rare British jazz musicians that then went off and became an internationally renowned player. David Holland's now seen as one of the greatest bass players in jazz history. After leaving the Miles Davis group, he didn't want to go down the fusion band. He was one of the few players not to form like a Weather Report or Return to Forever or Mahavishnu Orchestra. And he stayed much more in the sort of improvised areas. By the time he gets to the 80s, however, he has developed his own brand of jazz rock fusion and made some incredible albums with Steve Coleman and Marvin Smitty Smith and Kevin Eubanks. And you see that there's a couple of albums on ECM that this is why this one's so odd. I'll stay with this because this is the classic album. This one's a little bit more free. We have David Holland on bass, okay? And then we have Barry Altschul on drums. And then we have two players that are known as free jazz players. Sam Rivers, much more American sounding, sort of standard, if you can have a standard free player. And then the sort of mathematic, intellectual, chess playing genius that is Anthony Braxton. What an album. No piano on it, no chords. That always creates a level of freedom. And if I read Dave Holland's notes on the back. While living in London, I had an apartment with a small garden. During the summer, around 4 or 5 o'clock in the morning, just as the day began, birds would gather here one by one and sing together, each declaring its freedom in song. It is my wish to share the same spirit with other musicians that communicate it to the people, which is what he does. And I think that the choice of Sam Rivers and Anthony Braxton, especially when they're both playing flute, it really does sound like that. I love these symbols on the back. You know, this album was made in 1973. And this, along with Led Zeppelin 4, you know, the Untitled album, they also did the same thing. Now, this one here, I know that represents the monad, right? This obviously is representing 4 parts. I don't quite understand that. This here, very strange. You know. So there's if anybody knows what those symbols mean, because I love this esoteric stuff. And of course, there's a conference with the birds. And is it that some sort of poem or a book or something? You'll all tell me in the things, comments. This is it's a lovely original copy, I think, and we have a whole bunch of albums on ECM here. And we got the big ECM logo, the creative label. And then back before the internet, you could then write to them. Some great albums there. We've got Ruth and Dayacha, which is an album that Keith Jarrett and Jack DeJohnette made. And Keith Jarrett plays electric keyboards on there, organs and all sorts of things. That's Keith's own personal exploration of electricity, which of course he doesn't like, but he did do it there. That's a little bit of a secret for you. Here's a very out there album featuring British free jazz musicians. We've got Evan Parker, Derek Bailey, Jamie Muir. Just to give you an idea, that is an album I nearly put on the list. Chick Corea Improvisations, Volume 1. I preferred Volume 2 a little bit more. We've got Crystal Silence, that's been on the list. And Gary Burton's done some incredible albums on ECM. So, you know, that's just to give you a flavour. I'm really trying to give people a flavour. This is really like an introduction to ECM as well. For the novices. Of course, it won't be the novices on the comments showing off their knowledge and filling in all the gaps that I happen to miss. And they're very welcome, even if though you do seem like know-alls when you do it. Right, we're down to the last 3. Pat Metheny. Pat Metheny came to fame on ECM Records. His debut album, Bright Side's Life, is an absolute classic jazz rock fusion album. I like it. I really do like it. It's nowhere near my favourite Pat Metheny album. It does feature Jaco Pastorius on there, however, which I think has elevated it up. It's a great album. And then he forms his group. Lion Mays on keyboards, Danny Gottlieb on drums, Mark Egan on bass. That's his sort of first quartet. They make a number of albums. And by the time he gets to the Whites Pat Metheny quartet album, An American Garage. It's selling a lot of records, and he's another mainstay. He's one of the people who propped this label up. As he goes into the 1980s, he starts to get more expansive, and he makes some of my favourite albums, and any of these could have got on the list. Rejoicing, which is almost like his first tribute to Ornette Coleman, with a lineup that includes Roy Haynes on drums, is absolutely a beautiful album with some incredible playing. The live album 8081 that features Michael Brecker, Sam Rithers, Jack DeJohnette, it's these are all incredible albums. The live travels albums he did. He gets really interested in the early 80s, and he's starting to get epic and expansive, and you know he wants to go that way. And so in 1984, he jumps ship and he goes and joins Geffen Records, a major label, and then he goes on to sell a lot of records. In the late 80s, a Pat Metheny album would sell around about the 250,300,000 range. It's ridiculous to believe that. You know, now that would be a mainstream artist, you know. One of the last albums he made on ECM is this one. And this is the first album I ever got by Pat Metheny. I saw him in 1984 on Whistle Test, which was a follow-up to the old grey Whistle Test, play the track Are You Going With Me? And I couldn't believe it. It was so emotional. And he was for me, exploring an aspect of jazz rock, which had become big in the 80s, which is the much more softer, gentler jazz rock. Easy listening, you could call it. Pat Metheny can be easy listening, but still incredibly heavy. But he's not always easy listening. I went out and bought this album. It has the incredible Are You Going With Me, which is probably Pat's, you know, most popular tune, would you say, with that incredible guitar synth solo. But the opener on this, which is called Baccarale, is improvisation between him, Lyle Mays, and Nana Vasconcelos. And it's just out there and weird and strange, and it really is a new sound for jazz rock fusion. Olay, which finishes side one, is very rhapsodic, very romantic. And then we turn it over, we get 18, great track, and then we get the title track, Off Ramp. And this is exploring that sort of Ornette Coleman free jazz. That's followed up by another track, another one of his most popular tracks, The Incredible James, a tribute to James Taylor, which was written by Pat and Lyle Mays. Lyle Mays is so important. And James is very beautiful, very easy listening, but also very, very heavy. And there's been so much. Go and check out Rick Beato analysing. I'm sure he's analysed it, because that B section is insane. I have tried to solo over it on guitar a couple of times, and it's hard. And then it finishes with the Bat Part 2, which is a sort of soundscape album. There's the Be It cover with the classic group on. I think if I had to pick one Pat Metheny album, it would be this one. It doesn't do everything that Pat does, because once he'd left ECM, you do get this sort of epic, you know, which probably reaches a crescendo with the album The Way Up. But I have a very soft spot for that album. Right, number 2. This will always crop up very high on my list of greatest jazz albums ever made. When I interviewed the great Martin Speake, and he went through his 10 favourite albums of all time, it made his top 10. This is one of the greatest jazz albums ever made. Now, Keith Jarrett is the towering figure that has made literally hundreds of albums on ECM Records. And I could have easily have filled up this list with just Keith Jarrett and said, these are my top 10 favourite ECM albums. Such is the case with Keith, that I have actually placed this box set behind me, which could have been on the list. Any of the other solo piano improvisations albums could have been on the list. Invocations, Moth and the Flame, the double album you've made, which I have lost. This is one of my favourite albums. I need to replace it. Absolutely incredible album. All the trio albums with Gary Peacock and Jack DeJohnette. All the strange albums he's made, you know, there's so much stuff I mean, I'm a big Gurdjieffian. I'm not a Gurdjieffian, but I've read and followed Gurdjieff for 40 years now. He's influenced me greatly. He's made an album of Gurdjieff's music. Who else? What other record label would allow you to do that? The album I've decided to put as my number 2, and the album I would keep on a desert island if I was picking my 10 favourites ECM albums would be this one, of course, Belonging. I said that strange. Belonging. I went Belonging, which also features the great Jan Garbarek. It's also got Paul Danielson on bass and Jon Christensen on drums. We've got, this is just incredible album. Some of this is pretty fusiony. The opening spiral dance is pretty fusiony. The wind-up's pretty fusiony. We also get beautiful tunes, little, tiny little, I don't know what you'd call them, the opposite to epic. What would you call that when it's a little treat, little musical treat with tunes like Belonging, absolutely beautiful. We still get the gospel-y, Long As I'm Living Yours, Blossom, beautiful ballad, Solstice, beautiful contemplative music. This is an absolutely incredible album. This, more than anything else, represents ECM records. So why isn't it number one? Because there's an album on ECM that has, over the years, become such a massive favourite of mine. And it's so idiosyncratic and so unique for me, at any road. It sort of occupies its own genre almost. And it is this album by the great Eberhard Weber, Fluid Russell. This is just a wonderful album. The lineup is very strange. It's basically a quintet. Eberhard Weber on bass and tarang. Don't know what the hell the tarang is. We've got Bill Frisell, very early Bill Frisell. This is back in 1979. Bill Frisell on guitar and balalaika, which he plays brilliantly. Gary Burton on vibraharp and marimba. A great Burton performance here. And then two legends of jazz vocals, improvised vocals, Bonnie Herban and the great Norman Winston, who produced with just those two voices. I don't know if it's overdubbed, but it's just so beautiful, this sort of angelic choral sound. Now, this, you would assume, the band is basically guitar, marimba, and an acoustic bass. So you would think it would be very miniaturistic and small, very chamber jazz. It's not. This is the closest to prog, the closest to an epic that you're going to get on this list. The opening tune, Quiet Departures, is a whole side long. It's 17 minutes long. It's orchestrated. It's absolutely incredible. And it's a vast sound. I think it's the voices. The voices make it sound heavenly. This is just one of the greatest albums ever made. And then that tune seems to bleed into the other tunes on here. Fluid Russell, Pale Smile, and Visible Thoughts. Visible Thoughts. This is what ECM does that no other label does. So I can't champion this album enough. Now, of course, Eberhard Weber is another stalwart of the ECM label. He did albums in the 70s like Colours of Chloe, which he did, I think, with an orchestra, at least a string quartet. Absolutely incredible. I feel that there could be a number of treasures for me in this period of Eberhard Weber that are like this. And if anyone says, well, all his albums are like this, I know Colours of Chloe is very similar to this. I need to go and get them all because Eberhard Weber, I've got him on many other ECM albums, but I think I've only got 3 albums by him, and the other ones are much more standard ECM fare. This one's incredible, Fluid Russell. So I'm basically, asking the viewers here, is this a one-off? Is this like, yeah, that's his best album, you've got it there? Or did he make other albums like this? And put it in the comments. This is what we're here. You're here to help. You're here to help, aren't you? Now, I have to mention, as I disappear down here, because I put them out of reach, a couple of other things. There's a snottiness, I'm going to tell you all off here, there's a snottiness here about compilation albums' greatest hits. When I'm doing the best jazz albums or the best, especially when they get the jazz lot in, and I say, my favourite album by Charlie Parker is the best of Charlie Parker. And someone even mentioned that Alan Partridge joke, what's your favourite Beatles album? The best of the Beatles. But that would be my favourite Beatles albums. In fact, number one's, I've got it, and that's the one I put in the car. I love it. And then the red and the blue albums, they're my favourite Beatles albums, right? I can't see what's wrong with liking a best of, but I haven't done it here. If you've noticed, I haven't done it. But if I could include it In the 80s, early 90s, they brought out a series called Works, right? This is the Chick Corea Works. And these were programmed, I think, by the artists, but they're programmed so brilliantly that they feel like albums. And what's interesting is because the way ECM works is, you know, they will take Gary Burton, Chick Corea, stick them in the studio, and they will make an album. And that's the album. And then Chick Corea might do an album with a string quartet. Then he might do an album with a group. On these Works albums, Manfred Eicher and the artists pull all that together. So on this one, the Chick Corea one, it opens up with Addendum, which is Chick Corea playing with in a trio, which is a violin and cello. Then we get a solo piano. Then we get Chick Corea and Gary Burton, actually something off Crystal Silence. And then we get him in a large group, which is him with a vibraphone player, Gary Burton, and then a string quartet. Then we get a jazz trio with Miroslav Vitos, Roy Haynes. Then we get a duet improvisation with Miroslav Vitos, solo piano, and then we get Return to Forever, off the first album with Stanley Clarke, Joe Farrell, Chick Corea, Ayetu Maria, and Flora Purin. And so when you buy these albums, you get another take, but the way they're programmed, they feel like epic albums. And so these really are incredible. Now, this here is a screen print. Right, so that's like I used to do art, so this is like the way Andy Warhol works. So once they've created that, they can do different things. So they've dropped the yellow in, and then they put this green here, and so each of these Works albums takes that and abstracts it in its own way. So this series, oh God, I would love to have the whole of this. I think they made it in 2 blocks. They did this one, which covered Jan Garbrecht, Gary Burton, Ralph Towner, Pat Metheny, Egberto Gismonti, Chick Corea, Terje Rypdal, Keith Jarrett, Eberhard Weber, and Jack DeJohnette. And then they brought one out that was like white, and I can't remember who's on that. Just reading out this, I have to shout out Ralph Towner. Absolutely incredible. A couple of his solo guitar albums I've got nearly made this list. Egberto Gismonti. One of the greatest, just incredible. I wish I knew more about him. Everything I've heard by him is absolutely incredible. He plays incredible guitar, like this 9-string guitar. He plays piano, percussion. Egberto Gismonti went out into the South America, lived with the native South Americans and brought their music back in. An absolute giant of music. And his compositions have been covered by many people, including John McLaughlin, who seems to be a big fan of him. Who else did I not cover? Everyone else I've covered on here. So, yeah, the Works albums, really important. I can remember when I was very young, in fact, I'll tell you the date because it's when this album came out, 1987. So I was 19 and I was out with a girl, believe it or not. And I'd gone downtown. We were just having a day out. I won't say it was a date. I probably thought it was a date, but I don't know whether the girl did. Anyway, she wanted to pop in and look in the CD shop, and she went in. She was looking at whatever she liked at that time, which was probably Tears for Fears or something. And I wandered over, and at a very cheap cost was this album, ECM Spectrum Volume 1. And I bought it, and that was my Bible for ECM. On here, I had tracks by a whole host of people. This opened me up to so many artists. It opens up with a track by Oregon, The Rapids, which is off the album Oregon that came out in 1983. Incredible. I love Oregon. It's a band I'm exploring more and more. Then we have something off the absolutely classic Ballad of the Fallen. That could easily be on my list. Charlie Hayden's album that he makes with a sort of, almost like a brass band. We've got Terje Rypdal with that trio that I mentioned off the album Rypdal Vitos, Jack DeJohnette with the tune Sunrise, absolutely incredible. El Shanker, who played with John McLaughlin, Zappa, he moves over to ECM, makes some incredible albums. Who's to Know, which could be an Indian classical music, but I suspect it's not. It's like an impression of it. It's one of my favourite albums. That nearly made the list. He did a sort of fusion-y album in 1984 called Song for Everyone. He also made an album called Epidemics on ECM Records, and it features the incredible lineup of El Shanker, Percy Jones from Brand X on bass, and Steve Vai on electric guitar. This cost me so much money to get a copy of this in the 80s. I got it on import. It is undoubtedly the worst album ever made on ECM Records. El Shanker made it with his wife, or girlfriend, who's called Caroline. And you're all going to check it out. Go, can't be that bad if it's on ECM Records. It's horrendous. There's no drummer on it. It's a horrible drum machine. They're playing these horrible songs. They even brought out a promotional video. El Shanker got it in his mind that he was some sort of pop star at this point because he'd been playing with Peter Gabriel. So he goes to try and make this pop album. He hasn't got a clue what pop music is. I'm really surprised they put it out. The cover's great. Looks like an ECM album. And when I found out Steve Vai was on an ECM album, I had to go and get it. It's absolutely bloody awful. So if you want to know what the worst one is, it's that. What else have we got? Egberto Gismonte and Nana Vasconcelos Bianca off the album Duas Voices. And we've also got Don Cherry and Ed Blackwell. This is the sort of way out stuff they made. It's a classic album, El Corazon, that was made in 1982. And that is basically an improvised album of Ed Blackwell on drums and Don Cherry on various things. On this track, Street Dancing, he's playing the organ. Great. The drum sounds incredible. John Sermon, another guy I need to mention, British jazz musician, same period as John McLaughlin, Dave Holland. He has forged his own sound on ECM, building up to sort of almost like an orchestra of overdubbed saxophones. The album here that he made on his own called Withholding Pattern in 1984 features him on baritone, soprano, bass, clarinet, piano and synthesizer. They're great. We get a great John Abercrombie track from the album Current Events, which features almost like Mark Johnson's band, with Peter Erskine on bass. And I think that's it. That was a very important album. And if I could put sort of compilation albums on, this could well be near the top. Not just on the list, but near the top. Oh, I enjoyed that. It's nice to talk about music I like. You know, I've got to get back to talking about music I don't like because that's what's, pays the bills. But thank you for listening to this. I hope you enjoyed it. You're all the real fans here, and I will always make these videos. But if you are a real fan and you like this stuff, please subscribe because that will help, help the channel, especially these videos that I do more for the love rather than for the views. So please subscribe. Of course, you can support me, become a patron, blah, blah, blah. There's all that. Links are all down below. Have an explore. There's loads of stuff to explore for people without spending any money. So go and see what you can find out. Thanks for watching. I'll see you on the next video.